Welcome back to another episode of the Blockrunner Podcast. I'm your host, William, always here with your co-host, Iman.
What's going on, dude?
On the sticks, we got TJ.
Hello.
And finally, joining us today, we got Danny from Motoswap, and we got Chad Master from Motoswap. Appreciate you guys for joining, man.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
All right, dude.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.
You guys are fresh out of ETH Denver. Tell us a little bit about what happened. We went last year. We didn't go this year.
Yeah.
Last year, we got decimated by the plague.
We did. Like, literally almost died at the airport.
Literally. Literally.
And it seemed like last year was more of like an L2 fest. So we were kind of like disenchanted a little bit by that, personally. It's just like, dude, just like how many L2s do we need?
There's 50 L2s there.
Yeah, so I was assuming that was going to be like, they were going to rerun that. But from what we're hearing, it was more of like an Ord fest.
Yeah.
So now we have like a little bit of like, fuck,
Yeah.
we should have went.
Yeah.
So you guys can kind of like clue us in, like what actually went down over there.
Yeah, it was more of a ZK fest this year on the side of the actual ETH Denver.
Yeah.
Everything was ZK this, ZK that. It seemed like nobody was building anything but ZK there.
Yeah.
But they had
ZKs and
Ordinal.
L3s.
L3s.
Yeah, now we're on L3s. Holy shit.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I heard a lot of that.
Yeah.
Damn.
They had an Ordinal side event though that was just absolutely popping off. So we got a chance to show our faces there and meet a bunch of the cool people who we've kind of been interacting in the space with for a while now. So it was really, really fun. We had a panel that we had CB Spears on and Taga from Oil, Metashrew, Sandshrew. So it was just awesome to be able to connect with all these people.
Right.
Yeah, so we listened to that. We listened to that 2-hour thing, and it was really interesting.
Yeah, you guys had like a really like honest conversation, basically like what the hell is actually going on in this Ordinals and Metaprotocol space, because I can imagine from an outside observer perspective, like this shit doesn't make any sense. It's like, what the hell are you guys doing to Bitcoin?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you guys have really good experience. You guys have been around as long as we have, kind of like tinkering and trying to figure out like what can, you know, let's stretch the limitations. Like what can we actually do?
Yeah.
Right. And I guess like, so ultimately, like what is y'all's motivation behind that? Because we have our own, I don't know, we just have like our tinkerer spirit to us. We've always done this even on the Ethereum side and the Metaverse side. We just can't help ourselves but to try and like solve problems and just build shit. So what is pushing you guys to kind of like just do what you do?
I mean, I've been in crypto for 10 years, and Ordinals was the first time since like discovering Bitcoin, the first time that it just blew my mind what people are doing with this tech and like the kind of games people are playing with money. And so, yeah, I think BRC20 was a very, very, very cool step into bringing games onto Bitcoin, but it was literally an accident and it was not very well defined and they haven't been able to do much with it since then. And so it has like stifled people's perception of what you can do with metaprotocols. Metaprotocols are just basically like video games on top of a blockchain where you just send the command on chain and everything else happens off chain, just like the rest of the normal internet. And as like I was very, very EVM brained personally between like 2019 and 2023 until I found Ordinals. And it occurred like everybody thinks in crypto, you have to do all this stuff in the block. There's all these limitations of Ethereum because you're using Ethereum as data and as an execution layer. And what we're finding with meta protocols on Bitcoin is that you can use a blockchain as just a data layer and then use the rest of the internet that has all this infrastructure built for it already as like an infra or execution layer. And it, to the user, it doesn't feel any different at all. Like if you're using crypto like casino, which a lot of people in crypto are, it doesn't feel any different at all, even though the backend is totally different. And so like BRC20, it's a token, and so it did the whole sex game and it did all this stuff where it's been thrown into the market, and it's definitely a huge reason, in my opinion, why Bitcoin is pumping so hard. It's like people are playing these games, but we wanted to get in front of an audience of people who are from Ethereum and they look at the Ordinal stuff and they're like, what? I faded it because I didn't understand it, but it's obviously going to be a thing and I want to understand it now. So where do I even start? Because what is up and what is down? BRC20 is when you dig into it, if you don't have any like emotional ties to it, it's very silly. Like not in like a fun way, but in a holy crap, like they started to do video games on Bitcoin, but it's just emulating Bitcoin on top of Bitcoin, basically. So it has all the same limitations as Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And with Motoswap, we want to try and blow people's minds and experience it a little differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Because you have, a lot of people have this idea of BRC20, like I have tokens in my wallet, and that's just simply not the case. You have a receipt that is telling the indexer to credit your wallet with tokens, but you don't actually have any tokens in your wallet. So all of these assets are virtual or synthetic assets on Bitcoin. And they brought that concept in and literally did nothing with it and limited the functions to deployment transfer. So you have no ability to do any legitimate fungible asset trading. And you basically have to trade BRC20s like shitcoin NFTs. So that was like a huge driving factor for us to want to bring something interesting and new to market that really isn't very new at all to anywhere else in crypto, except on Bitcoin. Like this is the only place where you trade fungible assets in this way. And it's really inefficient, and it's a total liquidity suck. And there's a huge barrier to entry for new projects who might want to launch a token, because unless you have connections with a centralized exchange, you're pretty much dead in the water unless you can somehow market your product or your token enough to convince, $1 million of volume to be done on free minting, over 1,000 people to come in and mint at the same cost basis, and then have some sort of driving factor for people to buy those tokens peer to peer on like a marketplace. It makes absolutely no sense. So that's really those are the kind of the core issues that we're trying to address with Motoswap and the CBRC20 standard.
Yeah. So Danny, we have like a similar kind of background. Like we started in 2019, we're focused only on Ethereum. And so when we first discovered Ordinals back in February, March timeframe, we were really surprised with like this whole concept of BRC20s and the whole inscription JSON data thing. Because you're right, it's the JSON inscription is just a signal to everyone who's reading the blockchain as that this account has this amount of tokens, but it's not an actual asset that you hold in your wallet, in a sense. Because in order to move the fungible tokens, you need to create a new transfer inscription, and then whoever receives that transfer inscription, that account balance changes. And so all this is like presumably quote unquote on chain, because if there was a nuke and you could still read the block data, someone could re-index everything and come up to the same conclusion. Yeah. Right. And so it's pseudo on chain, kind of not really to a certain extent.
I'll actually, not to butt in, but it gets even crazier than that, because when you send a BRC20 token accidentally to a miner as part of like a fee, even though on chain, maybe you have a 10,000 already transfer inscription, right? And you try to send something to your friend, and you accidentally spend that transfer inscription as a gas fee, basically. If you do that, the BRC20 protocol just says you didn't do that. They implemented a difference where the on-chain information of even BRC20 is not one-to-one with the actual user information at all. Like the indexer that Binance, that Uniswap, that OKX, that Magic, everyone uses is not actually in line with the on-chain data. It's an interpretation of that on-chain data.
I didn't know that.
It's like totally off-chain. It's crazy.
So Danny, you're telling me that if I inscribe a transfer inscription and it accidentally is sent to a miner because it was, I don't know, some interface that I was using was improperly set up, the miner receives it, but the miner isn't credited for those tokens because that's the way that BRC20 works?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
I didn't know that. That's
Look at dummy-proof safeguards.
Yeah. Damn.
And it used to not be that way until Uniswap saw so many people have sent gas fees accidentally to miners, and the miners are just like shuffling them all through. They added it after.
Wow.
It's totally on the server side. So basically, everybody is playing off-chain games with on-chain signals. That is like what Metaprotocols are at their core, and it's super cool because you can do anything you want with them. You just have to. I mean, the other real black pill of the indexer stuff is like that decentralization is a total meme, because if your indexer state is distributed and there's no way for the servers to talk to each other, you basically have just released like a video game into the wild that you can't ever push any update to ever
Right.
because a million people are running your core. It's like if CSGO required every gambling website for CSGO skins to run a full version of the CSGO information. And then when CSGO wanted to push a new in-game feature, every single one of these gambling websites would have to update. It's total nonsense. So like BRC20, again, it's really, really cool as an experiment. And as like a cultural standpoint, it totally changed the way even myself look at Bitcoin. But as far as defining what you can do with meta protocols and giving like the general public ideas of it, it's super, super poorly executed because it was an accident. Like, I mean, BRC20, to be honest, is not even Domo's spec of what BRC20 is. Unisat just ignored a bunch of ideas that he had, a bunch of things that he laid out in the spec, and they made the minimal, most easiest version to index that allowed them to have PSBT swaps, which they can make fees on. So again, they're a company. They made an API for a company centrally indexed asset. And then other people started making indexers based on that same logic because it was so simple that it's just turned into this like unupdatable thing where you get like the freeze that they had before. And I know they undid that a little bit, but they still can't push any new core protocol updates yet. So it's just we wanted to go to ETH Denver to give people our non-BRC20 brained explanation and definition of what meta protocols are and what we're trying to do with them, because that explains how Motoswap works, which I just not to get too technical into it, but basically a big problem with BRC20 is that you have to send Bitcoin to transfer a token. You have to send Bitcoin from one address to another Bitcoin address. And this makes limitation of the types of addresses that your video game token can be stored on, right? It has to be a Bitcoin address. And Bitcoin addresses can't be contract addresses. There's always going to be some level of custody that is custodying the assets in this Bitcoin address. So if you have a DEX, if you're saying I'm going to build a DEX for BRC20 token, you are inherently not telling the truth, because the way the BRC20 protocol works is you cannot have an address that has no level of custody in it. You're building a bridge into some kind of DEX, or basically what Unisat did, or what Ords is doing, or what DotSwap did. There's a lot of people who have done like on-chain DEXs, basically. But to build a DEX for BRC20 is literally impossible, because without custody and in a permissionless way where you can list anything you want, is actually impossible on the protocol level, because you have to send BRC20 tokens to a to a Bitcoin address. And so what we've done with Motoswap is we just made an indexer that lets you put stuff on other addresses. Like it was crazy when we started digging into this stuff. And we're like, literally no one has experimented with elevating away from the BRC. Everybody's doing JSON files. Everybody's doing Bitcoin addresses only. I mean, you could have an indexer that looks at Ethereum and looks at Bitcoin, and you could send tokens from Bitcoin onto Ethereum without needing any kind of bridge, because everything is happening on the server side, not on the actual on-chain side. It's like there's a million things to explore in this world. I think this year is the year of the meta protocols. And the reaction to ETH Denver was just like astonishing, because everybody was super into it, even though we were completely open about the fact that most of this is centralized. Most of this is off-chain. The users don't care. I don't think I talked to a single person who wasn't like
bullish.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I mean, because right now the users of like anything BRC20 or Ordinals, they're basically casino goers. Right. And so they really don't care whether it's an on-chain or off-chain. They only care about number going up, and it doesn't matter how it happens.
I think we saw this shockingly with like Merlin. When Merlin entered the scene, it was like kind of like marketing to the world. Like, this is like Bitcoin's first attempt at like layer 2 execution, right? And not many people looked past that, right? And just kind of like, he spent a year building a lot of trust in the ecosystem and stuff. So whatever, these are these casino goers you're describing. I don't really need to do any due diligence. I don't really care if this is actually native to Bitcoin in any way, or if this is just like some sort of like Polygon spinoff. Doesn't matter.
Right.
And then couple of days later, $2 or $3 billion in custodial assets have been transferred in his direction.
Yeah.
Right. That's evidence that it's kind of like backing up exactly what you're saying. Like, you could basically do anything as long as like the narratives are strong enough. And I don't know if that ethos of like these Bitcoin maxis that everything has to be so decentralized is actually going to like spill and permeate into like this ecosystem we're building on top.
I don't think it's really Bitcoin maxis that are saying that. It's Ethereum maxis and Ethereum meta that has bled into the ordinals world, because that's all that existed before. Actual Bitcoin maxis have never moved their Bitcoin off of Bitcoin, and that's all they really care about.
Yeah,
like,
for sure,
if you can offer a DeFi-esque experience to a Bitcoin maxi who has bought Bitcoin, mined Bitcoin in 2010, whatever, never moved their Bitcoin off of Bitcoin, if you can tell them they can play games on top of Bitcoin directly without ever moving their Bitcoin off of Bitcoin, I don't see why they would ever have it. They don't even care about the on-chain execution. That's totally an EVM thing. Like, it's just old metas from like the 2017 bull market that kind of came into the last bull cycle that is bleeding into the original stuff of ordinals. But everybody who says they care about decentralization in ordinals is completely lying, because nothing is decentralized in ordinals. Everything is on the internet. So it's like, I've been saying this stuff for a long time, and people have hated my guts for saying it. It's like totally viewed as FUD, but it's not FUD, because you can do so much more with these chains. Like,
that's the frustrating thing. That's the frustrating thing, is that taking the FUD on BRC20 of, well, you're just sending signals to an indexer. That's not a limitation. That's like a feature, and you should build upon that feature and push the limits of what you can do with that. Like, for example, the way like Motoswap works is you're submitting an inscription to our indexer for a specific command that is, on our indexer, we've inputted all of the smart contract logic of Uniswap v2. And so you're basically sending calls to that smart contract via sending inscriptions that are crafted from Motoswap. So all the user has to do, really, set your swap parameters, your slippage, the tokens you're swapping, press the button, then the Motoswap will craft the inscription for you. And that inscription has all of the details necessary. It has the minimum amount in, it has the pool address that you're calling to, it has the token, all of the commands that are necessary. The indexer just picks that up, executes it, and updates the state of the network. So that's like, to us, something that makes total sense. On the user experience side, it just feels and acts just like it would on Ethereum or Solana. And on the back end, you're leveraging this ordinal technology, and you're leveraging this inscription technology to actually provide like real functionality and real usability for these fungible assets.
Did you know that we're more than just a YouTube channel? We also built Mscribe, the first inscription platform built from the ground up for the metaverse on Bitcoin. Connect your bitmap ordinals and use our tools to bring your community into the virtual realm. Support us by joining the movement at mscribe.io. Like, comment, and subscribe for the latest alpha. Back to the video. Let's dig a little bit deeper here. So let's walk through an example. For, I guess, anybody watching this, they probably have experience using Uniswap. And so in Uniswap, there's an automated market maker where you kind of supply both halves of the liquidity of a token, right? So in that situation, you use this swapping tool. You swap Ethereum for some other shitcoin, and it sort of like auto-magically happens, right, to the user. So, but on the background, that the pool of liquidity was leveraged to actually exchange the two tokens. So in a Motoswap situation, I'm doing the same thing. So I'm swapping these tokens. The way that I do that is I send basically a JSON onto Bitcoin, and that sends a signal to your indexer where I'm wanting to swap these two tokens. So is there a liquidity pool for these two tokens, or what is happening like on the back end for this stuff?
Yeah, so actually we don't use JSON. We use what's called Seabore, which is a 60% more compressed version of JSON. That's right. So it's way cheaper to use CBRC20 over BRC20 as well. Because JSON is just like not so good. Anyways, when you actually make a liquidity pool on Ethereum or on Uniswap, you're basically using Ethereum as a database to store values of things, and then you're also executing changes to these values, and it's happening on the chain as well. So if I want to make a swap on Uniswap, I have to pay to submit the amount of data in the block, and I also pay to execute that data in the Ethereum block. And so it's very expensive. Like if I wanted to just send Ethereum to myself with a message on it, it would cost me pennies. If I want to swap on Uniswap right now, it would probably cost me like $100.
Mm-hmm.
On Motoswap, all you are doing is inputting the amount of data, just like normally you see on a BRC20 stuff, a JSON file, right?
Mm-hmm.
In our case, it's just a string that is encoded in Seabore. And it basically looks like, I wish I had a whiteboard behind me, I can show you, but it looks like the stuff that you see in an Ethereum Uniswap command, but just the data, not the execution of it. So we basically abstracted one-to-one the stuff that happens that you send in a Uniswap command, which is you choose a token A and a token B. You choose a pair that you want to trade those two tokens on. You choose an amount of token A that you want to send out, and then you choose an amount of minimum accepted value of token B, which is how they do slippage. So basically you set like a minimum amount that you would accept, and then if the price goes lower or higher during that, then it won't send through, or if it goes lower. And so, basically what we do is we just split the two things. Instead of trying to make Bitcoin or require Bitcoin to be the place where you're submitting data and you're executing the data, we use Bitcoin for data because it's really good at being a database, a distributed database. And so, some cool stuff in the back.
You triggered the celebration.
Bitcoin is really good at being a database, and it's decentralized and it's distributed. So I can see that your trade was before mine if it's confirmed in the block, right? So there's no like level of non-transparency for trades. And then all the execution and the storage of the state of that data that's on chain happens on the side of the indexer. And again, this is literally exactly how every single Metaprotocol works. This is how BRC20 works. This is how BRC100 works. This is how TAP works. This is how BRC420 works. Everything works like this. They just haven't taken a step forward into this world of not taking the BRC20 model where you're doing JSON files and you're doing Bitcoin addresses, you do all this stuff.
We allow for LP addresses, which are like virtual addresses, basically, that you can call to. So we're harnessing the virtualization of the state, the fact that all these assets are synthetic assets on Bitcoin. And the indexer is functioning much more like a BVM, like a Bitcoin virtual machine, than just a simple index, right?
Okay, so that means that so what happens with liquidity provision? Is that still happening in a Motoswap transaction, or how does that side of the like the participants like partake here in like getting, is there some sort of like LP tokens issued here, or like how does the liquidity provision work?
So you get minted. Again, what we did is we took all of the logic line by line of the Uniswap B2 smart contract, and we abstracted that into the language. We use Node.js, right, for our indexer. So we abstracted that into Node.js. It's a lot easier to do math in Node.js than it is to do in Solidity. So this stuff is, anybody could do these things, right? There are lots of games that people could play that we've played on Ethereum that we haven't before. And we just abstract the logic into our indexer. And so it's literally as though our BRC20 indexer had an upgrade to it where we slapped on a bunch of new features, and now it can do all this stuff. We have the ability to do that because we didn't distribute our CBRC20 indexer to 1 billion people yet.
So
the ability to push updates.
Just to answer your question, it's there's a 1% fee from the swap, which is just standard in the Ordinals world. All the marketplaces take 1%, and 0.6% of that goes to liquidity providers, and 0.4% of that goes to stakers in the Moto staking pool.
Okay, that makes sense. So in this situation, are we able to take anything that's occurred on Ethereum and just like run it on like CBRC20? And like,
you got it. Run it all back, sir.
Yeah, run it all back.
Okay. That's the whole thing.
So do you think exactly if the market, like the users are casino goers, does it really matter that any of this stuff is like centralized? Like, does that really make a difference?
I don't think so. And again, you're playing with you still own your asset, right? You have your private key. I don't have your private key. The internet service that you're using is giving you an amount or showing you some reaction to something. But again, other people will be running the CBRC indexer for sure. We're actually, I don't know if you guys know of Oil or Sandshrew, like we mentioned before, but we're going to work with them. They're basically making an RPC service for Metaprotocols and for Bitcoin stuff. So it should be awesome because we could have like a highly active RPC endpoint that we point developers and users to basically point to for their information. And that allows us to long-term like distribute our indexer state while also pushing updates to the indexer itself. Which again, BRC20 was literally an accident. It was an experiment, and then Domo's like Twitter idea was kind of taken away from him by, in my opinion, it was taken away from him by Uniswap, and then they like gave him the credit, but it was kind of a curse because he the poor guy's like been brainstorming for over a year now on how to do stuff on BRC20, and how many updates have there been to BRC20? Exactly zero. Yeah. So yeah, I feel very bad for him. We're just making like we're trying to make what BRC20 would have been with a year of foresight, and that's basically what we've done.
So how do you envision like these off-chain games, as you described them, I guess kind of like morphing or evolving into the future? Is this something that like, because I mean, we're kind of like painting a picture of like centralized operations here, but like, is this something where down the line, like you've identified like a scripting model, I guess, where you could strip the abstraction components that are native to Ethereum and now implement this as part of like your logic, right? The execution environment that you guys are indexing. Is this something that can be ubiquitously applied? Any other developer can come in and just kind of like recreate what you guys did, and or they're gonna have to come to you guys directly. It's like, we did it this other way. Like, this is how we created our abstraction process. Now you guys are gonna have to kind of like determine this is like worthy of indexing, re-architecting as a result, right? Is it that seamless, or is it more like these game creators that are launching their own meta protocols? We don't want to do that. Like, we just want to build our games, and then if you have your own idea, you build your own meta protocol with your own game. You know what I mean? Like, how does the ecosystem expand like from this starting point?
I mean, I literally view it as video games. Like, there are people, you can't send your V-Bucks on Fortnite to your CSGO account to buy CSGO stuff, but people still play both video games, right? So like, I do think that there will be plumbing and infrastructure that's made that will, make the space a little bit more aimed towards decentralization. Like, there's a lot of want from people, supposedly, that they want decentralization on this layer of meta protocols. And so we're just very early right now, when we're at the point where no one cares and no one's done it. So what we're building right now will be like, we're going to make a bunch of games. Yeah, you can play the games that we are providing to you. Yeah. We're going to continue to update our indexer and do things like this. But again, I do think that with things like the Oil and Metashrew RPC and stuff like that, there should be ways down the line for there to be ways to interlink things and find consensus between other upgrades. And I definitely think it's possible. It's just not there yet.
Yeah, I guess.
Right. What we want to do is build out all of the DeFi primitives that we possibly can, pretty much within our system, our ecosystem. We don't want to rush to distribute or decentralize in a market that's completely centralized anyway. So we would just be kneecapping ourselves, just like BRC20, if we had some mad rush to decentralize. We want to make our system as robust as possible, offer as many DeFi primitives as we possibly can, expand the market, provide an environment for people to play, for people to do as much as they possibly can, import as much of the Ethereum experience and the DeFi experience directly onto Bitcoin L1 as we possibly can. And then concurrently, there will be like Sandshrew, Metashrew, Oil, like the back end to inevitably have total interoperability between meta protocols and distribution and decentralization. All that stuff, I think, is a good long-term vision, but we don't want to kneecap the functionality at the beginning by trying to accomplish something that, again, it clearly just is not a market demand right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess just to kind of piggyback on Iman's question here. So it's like kind of like in a different angle. If we were wanting to create our own meta protocol using CBRC20, is like all the tools are out there to do that, or are we sort of like we can only play the games that you guys make so far for now?
It will be the same way that all meta protocols work currently, right? Which is here's the amount of tools you can play with, there will be some things like we want to add tax tokens. We want to add liquidity mining. We want to add all sorts of cool stuff. Staking for more tokens for other things at some point would be cool. But what we're going to start with first is more of like, I really would love to see, even more than just CBRC20, the space aim more towards this way. That's like, I would like for there to be a second definition, maybe a better definition of what metaprotocols are, and a really understandable game that everyone can play, and it's on Bitcoin, and it's the same experience as BRC20. They're like, how is this possible? It would be cool to see people fork that idea and do whatever they want with that. Just like even outside of CBRC, as just a pure Ordinals autist, I would really like to see the space go better than just JSON files, and you got to put everything on a Bitcoin address, and then we're going to do L2s and L3s. It's like, no, come on. Let's do some fun stuff.
Hey, just since you guys have, you've already demonstrated like the act of compression, right? With utilizing Seabore and stuff, like, to your knowledge, can it go even further than like a 50%? Can this become like Bitcoin's attempt at actually achieving some sort of like scalability execution environment by continuing this compression route? It's like, now we're down to like 90% compression. It's like, we don't need L2s anymore, right? It's like, we have these just very light transactions happening native on Bitcoin. Like, how can that be achieved? Have you explored that?
I mean, I think there's some interesting stuff in terms of like the mempool as well. The mempool stuff is really crazy because how little do people care about stuff being on chain is like the question. Because right now people say they care, but the money and the tech is not on chain at all. Again, BRC20's state is not aligned with the actual on-chain information of BRC20 following the BRC20 protocol.
Sure.
So people don't care about stuff being on chain. And an interesting experiment. I don't know. I was living with our lead developer for like 6 months, just doing R&D on how all this stuff works and what do people care about. Not watching the pump and not participating because we wanted to just learn how it works. And if people don't care about things being on chain already, then maybe you could just use the mempool and you could index the mempool, and the mempool like keeps stuff in the pending state for like 2 to 4 weeks. Even if you send dust with the lowest gas fee, you can fill the mempool up pretty infinitely. There's no block size limit for the mempool, and so it's like that to me, if I had to make some totally schizo long-term call that is very, very poorly defined right now of what Bitcoin scaling actually looks like, is indexing the mempool and using Bitcoin as like a broadcast layer, because it literally already, the same way that like Casey discovered ordinals, you can just start indexing the mempool and flip the switch on like Bitcoin as a universal broadcast layer for literally anything. And we already have a replacement for AWS for like when you click on things and when you make an action on the website, you can use the mempool in these kind of ways. So that, again, that's not exactly what we're doing right now, but we've been doing so much R&D. We are not thinking about ordinals and stuff like whatever the market is. It's
that I have several conversations with Iman. Is basically it revolves around the questions like, what are we doing here? Yeah, it's like, are we are we here to like service the casino industry, or are we like here to like, I don't know, contribute in some sort of way? Like, I don't know, moving the ball forward in some direction. I don't really know which direction, but like just like moving the ball forward in whatever direction. So, like, what do you think is the long-term like angle for like these types of technologies? Like, is off-chain really like the end game here, or is the market like demographic as casino goers like the only market we'll ever have for crypto, or like what are we doing here?
Well, I think the beauty is that we can start with something like casino, games on Bitcoin, but you can expand this idea out to an almost infinite amount of functionalities, like from, utilizing Bitcoin as this sort of data layer and replacing AWS for Web 2 and just the general internet, kind of doing like a Web 2.5 thing. That's super usable and not casino really based at all. And there's a lot of stuff you could do in between, right? Like, for example, like with the right custodian, like this is sort of like a idea that we've been kicking around as well. Like with the right custodian, you could custody Bitcoin and do wrap Bitcoin on Bitcoin and issue synthetic versions of it. You could do wrapped ETH. You could do wrapped Solana. You could even wrap real world assets, just like Michael Saylor has always called for, synthetic stocks on Bitcoin. This is really kind of like the way you can do it, because you can just issue a synthetic token on Bitcoin for whatever assets being custodied. Like, again, we have no real interest in custodying ourselves. But again, if the right custodian comes around, then there's kind of a there's really not many functional limitations of what you can utilize Bitcoin for, especially if you are able to circumvent some of its limitations by playing these off-chain games. So it kind of starts with casino from our perspective, but it can move into, again, sort of a limitless direction almost.
Yeah, I find that interesting because a lot of the stuff that's happening right now on crypto in general, it is casino based, but I do see some elements of like progress being made with a lot of these developments that we sort of like initially were like casino focused, but they end up being like useful. Like I remember talking about like these food tokens, right? These like liquidity farming stuff, like copy and paste stuff. And all of a sudden, like there's like legitimate derivatives being done with this sort of technology. And there was a video I saw recently, this science channel talking about options, right? Doing calls and puts. And, this is like 10 times, like derivatives are 10 times the size or 50 times the size of like the underlying asset themselves. And we're able to bring this stuff now onto potentially Bitcoin, like you guys are saying, in this style. And I think bringing that on Bitcoin is going to like elicit like a new level of like financial paradigm, right? Because it's all like on chain and stuff, like all these transactions at least.
Well, that's the thing. So are there things happening in TradFi? Are those like identifiable as just casino activity as well?
I guess that's more, yeah.
I mean, even though it underpins a lot of like what real world economics kind of relies on and stuff, that in itself is some sort of like achievable progression point, right?
Yeah.
Like, we've leveraged the mechanisms of casino behavior, human casino
and the traditional
activities,
finance,
and we've used that to our advantage to kind of like support economic progress. Right?
Yeah, and I guess the issue I have here is like it's not so much of an issue, but it's more like an identification of like the demographics. Like right now we're focused on like these casino goers, but that's not really a bad thing.
No,
right? I mean, our entire economy is a casino, right? And so it isn't that bad. So I feel like, ultimately with this stuff, we are making, we are moving the ball forward. It's just, it's not obvious.
Not yet. Yeah. Right now, because we're flipping PayPays and stuff right now.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like we're progressing humanity.
Money is funny.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I think
it's like a Trojan horse and a Trojan horse and a Trojan horse. It's like you're Trojan horsing real world functionality. Again, you could long term replace AWS with the type of stuff that we're building casino games for to begin with. So it's like you continue. There's so many layers of abstraction of how this stuff is done. But again, everyone likes making money. Our entire world is run on financial incentives, and crypto is entirely financialized. So it's like financially incentivized. So it's like start there. There's a clear demand. There's a clear market for that stuff. We want to make it easy. We want to make it fun for people to play on Bitcoin and open to everybody. Like we want the ETH user to be able to hop onto Bitcoin and be like, oh my God, it's like the new L2, but it's actually Bitcoin L1. And have that sort of shift. And then everyone's using Bitcoin for this stuff, and the games are continuing to get more expansive. And again, guys like Larry Fink from BlackRock and Michael Saylor have called for apps and called for tokenized assets on Bitcoin and synthetic assets. So once big players like that see the path to achieve their dreams in regards to that type of stuff, then all of a sudden there's like the line between what's degenerate casino gambling and what's legitimate financial institutions, it gets extremely blurred.
Well, okay. Literally on that exact point, think about ordinals. Ordinals started with JPEGs, and like the first people to start going crazy with it were Solana people in 2022. Like that's Solana was $6 then. Those are the degens, and I mean, when Ordinals first started, there were no wallets, there were no marketplaces, there were no PSBT auction sites, there was nothing. And so like degeneracy created a need for infrastructure. And then infrastructure was created.
That's right.
And then infrastructure was created. And so people started having ideas. They had SNS. That was the first Metaprotocol. They had other ideas. They had BRC20. BRC20 had the infrastructure of wallets to exist. They had the infrastructure of marketplaces to exist. It had YouTube tutorials already at that time, a couple months in. Yeah. And so boom, degeneracy. Again, now new wallets are created, new marketplaces are created. People are making bridges from Ethereum into degeneracy leads the way because degeneracy is what when there are not the needs for something to thrive. Degens don't give a shit. They go and they trade on Excel spreadsheets. They go and they trade on Dune dashboards. They're like they don't care, and then tools are made for what they're lacking. So it's like degens, meme coins, and experiments is what the next year is going to look like. And we're going to 420K at least. That's what I think.
Did you know that we're more than just a YouTube channel? We also built MetaZone, the first app store for the metaverse. Buy, sell, and explore a new class of digital assets like our flagship game Rovi.ai. Support us by collecting your digital assets through MetaZone at metazone.io. Like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated. All right, back to the video.
You know what? We were just having that conversation. I kind of piggyback on that because the last time Bitcoin's all-time high was what, 69K?
69.
And it's like there has to be some sort of like shadow force that is just memeing the planet, and I think they're gonna do it again at 420K. I think it's just like this many people on Earth, with a shit ton of Bitcoins. Like they just decide, right? All these fucking models and charts that people are coming out with, like none of that matters from my perspective.
Yeah,
it's this many people.
Yeah.
They're gonna just decide, and it's like fuck all you guys, 420K, because it's funny.
Yeah,
it's happening.
Maybe I don't know. I had the same thought, but Will seems to think that's irrational. It's like no way, dude.
Yeah,
no way.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest bag holders are definitely the ones to decide. I don't know if they're gonna wait till 420, but yeah,
that would be pretty insane if they did that though.
Yeah, because I remember the last cycle. You guys remember too? It's like Bitcoin for sure is going to 100K.
Yeah,
and then now people are saying for sure it's going to 500K.
I'm hearing like 700K.
Yeah,
million maybe. Why not 2? Like it's getting crazy again. Like these projections,
these predictions. Yeah,
predictions. Yeah,
it's programmed in.
We're at the precipice of I feel like a massive bull run, and I really think that L1 Bitcoin DeFi type games are really going to lead the way because it's one of the last kind of like unexplored, uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And Ordinals and BRC20s and just all the meta protocols that have existed so far have sort of paved the way for something cool to exist, but nothing really cool has existed. And that's why BRC20, the limitations of it are obvious, but it showed the demand for fungible assets on Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So really what we really want to do is try and bring that to market in a way that it makes sense to people, that is easy for people to understand, that has long-term use cases, but starts with fun kind of gambling games. And yeah, I mean, just the ability for a new project to come in and launch a token, instantly LP it, open trading in a non-custodial, non-permissionless way, lowers the bar of entry for new projects to come in and build on Bitcoin directly on L1. I mean, you got all of the shitcoiners from every other chain are going to want to come in and launch tokens and play new games. And you could even, you can have more use cases than just memes, right?
I'm sorry, all the meme coins though. I'm sorry, all the meme coins on BRC20 are bad memes. Also, there's not a single meme coin on BRC20 that is a good meme. Everything is awful and it's pigeonholed. I mean, I'm a huge meme coin guy, and it's insane to me that they can't even change from the 4 ticker length thing. Oh my God, it's just impossible to do anything good culturally. And so you're stuck with this first is first. And what's I think going to be the motto of the cycle next? I think best is best. And there is no second best. So there will be there'll be some good stuff.
I totally agree. I think first is just like an easy narrative for people to get behind, but it's never going to be the long-lasting one because it's primitive, right? And so we need to build on the shoulders of giants and improve stuff. And so if you guys are saying that the CBRC20 is more compressed, easier to transact with, you can do pretty much anything that we've seen in crypto on CBRC20, that already sounds better. And I think the most important thing when it comes to an ecosystem is facilitating tools for developers, because once you do that, then you're going to see like actual growth degeneracy, which is what we want, right? We want the degens to come in and like start speculating, because once they figure out, it's like, hey, this is cool. Then it's like, it brings more developers to say, hey, you know what? I can fix the stuff that you guys are dealing with. Here's my thing. Right.
Yeah. I think it's also important too, to get to that point for you guys specifically, is to onboard, more developers to your game that you're creating, just because in every single case we've seen it not always like will take you by surprise. They're going to develop things that you guys hadn't even thought of.
Yeah.
Right. If you introduce these types of tools, these creator tools, and then that's going to add tremendous value to the ecosystem as a result. So yeah, I mean, I already know you guys are heading in that direction for sure, but that's for everybody who's building meta protocols, because I think you guys are right. The more you kind of like spread this message around and this understanding, you're going to see more people attempting to do exactly what it is you guys have done. Right.
Yeah.
So, you're laying out the blueprint basically, and you're like, unveiling it. It's like, this is how you do it, guys, on Bitcoin. Right. So
yeah.
I think, it's going to start
This
there.
has been like a big industry secret, basically, since the BRC20 indexer was made.
Yeah.
Anybody could have made a BRC20 indexer. Like literally, there are a million people on the planet who could have made a BRC20 indexer. Uniswap just did it, and they made a marketplace, and then they closed it off, and they funneled all the people in. It had its explosive moment, and then by the time people started making their own indexers, Uniswap had not done anything to chokehold their position. They hadn't added any new features that would make it harder to index. So yeah, I mean, anybody can literally make a meta protocol. Yeah. I realized this was like a meta that's happened maybe once or twice already, where a lot of people will write like a Git book or something for some kind of indexer with some kind of idea or a standard, and they'll inscribe some JSON stuff. Mm-hmm. The magic is in the indexers, and if you are a JavaScript or a TypeScript or a Node.js dev or something like this, make an indexer. Like it's this is the time to do it. This is the time to do it.
The limitations for BRC20 are not inherently in the way BRC20s are crafted. It makes it really hard to scale the way that they have their stuff done, because the indexer is super clunky. It's like 300 gigabytes to run, but it's on the indexer, and they only programmed it with the logic for deployment transference. So that's all you can do. And so, yeah, again, like the real sauce is that, I mean, with BRC20 or CBRC20, I should say, in its current form, there are just limited functionality, right? You have deployment, transfer, and token send, which is just like, I make an inscription in my wallet that says I send my tokens to Danny, and the indexer picks that up and just credits Danny's address with those tokens. So the inscription to send is in my wallet, and so you only requires one transaction.
It's one transaction.
Yeah, it's all in one transaction. Which again, that's like we're taking advantage of the virtualization of states instead of hampering ourselves by like some fake limited functionality. Because again, you could in theory have done this with BRC20. They just Uniswap, when they made the indexer, didn't. So the call is more, if you have a meta protocol idea, build the indexer for it too. That way you can be in control of the logic that your indexer can process, and you can implement your standard in the way that it should be implemented based on your own spec. Yeah. Versus, again, what happened with Domo, which was unfortunate, that his spec wasn't even built, or BRC20 wasn't even built fully to his own spec, because he wasn't the guy to build the indexer.
Right. That makes sense. So in order to transfer a token, you just need to inscribe basically a token send, and then once you pay for it and it's in your wallet, that the balance is automatically updated to that address that's in that token send.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool.
Exactly. And then you can send to multiple addresses too. It's just like our airdrop function is on board. It's just like you can say, I want to send, if I've got 10 bajillion tokens in my wallet, I can pick 100 addresses to receive those tokens, and I could say to the indexer, my inscription says send 100 tokens to each one of these addresses.
So do you also do PSBTs to list some of these tokens for sale?
Yeah, so that's the first transfer feature that we made. Okay. So we initially spec'd out just exactly BRC20, but in Seabore, so it's better formatted, and then we don't we indexed it a little bit differently. Okay. So we started with that, and then we added this feature. What he's talking about is like token send. It's called Xmail, as it was called, and you can instantly send tokens from your address to another address in one transaction like this, and it's very interesting because we got a lot of pushback from people on how this works. because I think the only other people to do this are like the track guys in the tap token.
Mm-hmm.
And so we looked into how they do it afterwards, and I can explain just the differences because this has been very confusing for people. So when you make a tap ball, a token send to multiple people, you inscribe an airdrop list of people that you want to send the token to with an amount of token.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to send that inscription to yourself again to prove that you are the holder and the actual owner of this address.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't do that, then I could inscribe something to your wallet that says send all of your tokens to my address.
I see.
And it would just do that, right? Yeah. So the way that Benny and the Tap guys implemented it is you have to send it twice. So it's still 2 inscriptions, even though it is like a virtual sending. What we do is we made a strict protocol requirement that actually completely takes away from the ordinal client itself, because you need the funder of your inscription creation and the recipient of your inscription creation to be the same address. And there's no way to fake that based on blockchain confirmed information, right? And that's enough proof that you are the funder. Basically, you do both those things in one transaction.
Sure.
And so because we have this instantaneous kind of trick, that is what has allowed us to, make Motoswap allow for instant trades, allow for airdropping of tokens in one transaction, allow for sending of just regular tokens. So we can do these virtual actions because of that little trick, which is cool.
Yeah, so, that makes sense.
That's how it works.
That makes sense. It's way more efficient because you're dealing with one transaction instead of 2. But what's your opinion on like this bloat on ordinals? And so once you do this like token transfer or token send inscription, it still sits in your wallet as like I guess an individual asset. Do you guys do anything with this stuff? Do you release the sats that's associated with this particular like UTXO? Like how do you do anything with that?
So ideally, that is exactly what would happen, right? I actually am very glad you brought that up, but that is on the side of a wallet creator, not on the side of the protocol itself, right?
Oh, okay.
So basically, once Oil Wallet is out, I hope I can't confirm that they would do this or not, but I hope that they allow for specific syntax, right? So if someone sees a virtual action happening for like a one-time use ordinal, it just goes right back into your spend address, and you can just use it. So that would be awesome.
Any wallet can do this. Again, it's once there's a direct market need and there's a lot of people using Motoswap and doing these types of actions all the time, then I think there'll be a clear need for whatever wallet provider to not only recognize these assets in wallets, but also optimize how those bloated inscriptions basically are managed. But all that being said, indexing CBRC20 because of Seabore is so much more efficient than BRC20. For example,
we actually modified the ord client to filter by. So we're not in the content of an ordinal; we're in the envelope of an ordinal. So you can use OP push 5 and OP push 7 for the metadata and for the Metaprotocol fields of the ordinal envelope itself. And basically, the way that the ordinal envelope is designed, you can either, when you look at an ordinal in your database locally. It has everything. It's like looking at a big file cabinet with envelopes, and then inside of each envelope is the content of your inscription, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to index, obviously BRC20, but let's say you're trying to index tap token, right? You are a text-based JSON content Metaprotocol.
Yeah.
And so if you are going to index the tap protocol, that means you have to index every single text file that has ever existed on the entire Bitcoin blockchain in the Ordinals database. And you can't filter by any kind of specific tag, because the only thing that lets your Metaprotocol indexer know that this is a tap inscription is once it opens up the envelope and then looks at the actual content, and it sees inside the content there's something uniquely saying this is the tap protocol.
Yeah.
So that makes it very, very difficult. If you're trying to build a Metaprotocol right now that's text-based, your database for indexing is going to be 150 gigabytes plus. I mean, it's massive. Yeah. And so what we did is we put our Metaprotocol instructions on the ordinal envelope itself using the actual Metaprotocol field in the ordinal envelope, because Casey and Raph were so great to add that for us.
Yeah.
Not actually for us. Yeah, we use it for that. And it's basically like, what's easier to sort? This giant file cabinet where you have to open up every envelope and then sort it by the content, or a giant file cabinet with envelopes and you can just look at the envelopes and take out the ones that you want. So our ordinal client, when we index, is only like 4.5 gigabytes.
Wow.
It's only that big because some people have inscribed like text files and images on top in the content of the inscriptions that have the envelope on it. So you can do like dual inscribing as well. So you can inscribe an image, or you can even inscribe a BRC20 token in the content.
Yeah.
And on the envelope of that ordinal, you can have a CBRC20, and you can do like double stuff. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
These were all like the things we had before we're pushing the protocol upgrade for Motoswap. So that's like we had to build the back end and build the basic functions out for CBRC20 to exist before we push a protocol upgrade that enables all these extra virtual functions.
So, so this meta protocol, or this meta aspect of the ordinal envelope, that was a recent update with Jubilee, right?
No, they actually added that directly after the version that everybody froze on. They added it to 0.10.
Okay. Oh yeah, I remember that.
Froze on 0.9.
Yeah. So I mean, so you guys released CBRC20 after that 0.1, right?
We released it on 0.131. It was a full 3 full version updates before anybody thought to use the. I'm telling you, it was crazy. Junk Food, the lead developer.
Yeah. We
were sitting at the table one day, and he was reading through the issues tab of the GitHub, and he saw that there was like something that someone asked, or someone put an update, some kind of, I think Raph put an update to some documentation on it. It was like he translated it, and he was like, "Holy shit, we have to do BRC20, but in the Metaprotocol field, and also this could be everything." Like, it was like a magic moment. It was great.
Yeah, I remember
that was in December.
I remember the story. Yeah, you guys saw that update, and then I think like 2 days later, you released CBRC20, right? Something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it came at like the perfect time where like everybody was kind of understanding what Uniswap was attempting to do by freezing.
That's right.
The OR client, just to kind of like, and it's like, here you guys going, leveraging its best new components. This is why you don't want to kind of like freeze at like an older version, because you can't do all these like interesting things. You can, but outside of I guess the logic of the base protocol layer, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting, man. I just want to get you guys' perspective on, because clearly you guys are deploying something very, very potentially powerful and useful and very functional and robust. But everybody who's deployed these meta protocols up to this point, specifically like directed for fungibility, and then what you could do with that, there's something on the horizon called runes on its way. Like, well, what is that? How does that factor into everything we just talked about? Like, what is the percentage that this whole Bitcoin meta protocol space just kind of like
the casino
dissolves
to runes.
It just turns into the Casey casino. What is that?
No. So I mean,
good opportunity to explain sort of the, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what runes is actually going to be, at its core, and I'll let Danny hop into the like greater details, but at its core, it's going to be a better way. Every inscription that you make is using Casey's Ord client to. Every inscription is technically fungible or non-fungible, right? Because they're numbered, right?
Correct.
And he hates that, and he hates BRC20, and he wants there to be, a way for there to be fungible tokens that aren't numbered and using the Ord client. And so that's what runes is going to be. Danny can give you an explanation as to why that's not going to. I don't think it's going to give the functionality that I don't think it's going to give the functionality that people think it's going to give. Because again, the focus is much more on the indexer side to accomplish all this stuff, less on how the standard is, actually created. And Danny can kind of give you a little bit more insight onto.
Yeah, from my perspective, he's just like he's a developer. He is a very autistic developer, and we love him for that, right?
Yeah.
Casey, he's a great guy, a very, very smart guy, and he made a really, really good non-fungible standard that allowed people to build things on Bitcoin. And in his mind, as the protocol creator, as the guy who wrote the spec and did all the stuff, he is like, thinking so deeply and intently on every part of how this is a standard for non-fungible things. This is only going to be used for non-fungible things, right? And then suddenly the degens enter into his thing, and they start using his thing in a way that he's like, how the fuck could you ever even possibly think to use the thing that I have created in this way? It ignores everything that he's ever thought about, every bit of research and development, any ideas ever had about what an ordinal is. BRC20s came up and said, we don't care. We don't give a shit. And people loved it. And he hated it. And so I think what would have been so much better is if early on to BRC20, if they literally just used a different word than the word ord to index their database by, right? If you could like choose a different magic code and then index your database on that magic code, and then you could have browser crafters or wallets that index with the code BRC20 instead of ord. Then Casey could have like his ord client still, and there could be the ord client, but there could be different databases of different inscriptions. There could be ordinal inscriptions. There could be BRC20 inscriptions. There could be et cetera, right?
Yeah.
But that isn't what happened. And so to rectify that, he has spent a lot of time making a really, really, really thought out fungible token standard. But I will tell you, from reading the spec, from following the conversation, he is not making a degen paradise. That is not at all what Casey is making. Casey is making loot on Bitcoin, and it's going to have lore, and there's going to be like, it's going to be gamified. It's going to be like a old money. He's not making something that's Uniswap on Bitcoin. He's not making DeFi on Bitcoin. Again, just to really show the differences of why there's no very, 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 very minimal overlap between CBRC and runes. Runes still will have to be stored on a Bitcoin address, just like BRC20 tokens. BRC20 tokens have, Bitcoin addresses have a private key attached to them, and there's no way to renounce that private key like on Ethereum. There's only, Ethereum has two types of addresses. It has contract addresses and EOAs, where they're user-controlled. Bitcoin is just user-controlled addresses. And so there is no way for you to renounce a Bitcoin address, which means you can't have truly custody-less interactions with DeFi. Like, I feel like a big part of the D of DeFi is the fact that it's not just an on-chain centralized exchange. Like, the Uniswap can't take my liquidity out whenever they want to because they don't have my private key. Right. And so, like, you can't do that. You literally, it's impossible on the protocol level with BRC20 to make DeFi because it has to be on a Bitcoin address. Therefore, runes will have the exact same limitation. It just will, like, there might be ways to set a token that mints with a bonding curve, and you have to send sats to an address to actually mint a token so projects can raise funds. Like there's cool stuff that he's doing for
It'll be fun.
But it's not really going to be, and absolutely zero people who are looking for an experience that they just click the button and understand. They will not have that experience with runes. And I don't think he's making it. He's not like marketing it as that either. Other people are doing that and kind of twisting what he's making, I think. But I think of it as loot. I think of it as loot on Bitcoin, and it's going to be interesting for a market cycle, but I don't see how, if it doesn't fix the liquidity problem, it's just still BRC20 to me. It's still BRC20 to me. Even though to Casey, that's probably the worst thing you could ever say. And I apologize if he ever hears that. To me, it's the exact same thing as BRC20.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because right now it's like our prediction is that I guess Casey has such a strong say in things, and so he can like sway the invisible hand that we keep talking about. And even though like it's like BRC20 2.0, if you will, that if Casey says like, hey, this is cool, I think the degens are sort of going to like focus on that potentially.
Yeah, like you said, for
it's ordinal degens. It's not Ethereum degens. That's true. That's correct. Like I think ordinals are going to have a lot more new people come in, and I think there will be kind of like bitmaps. Like I think bitmaps are cool. Ethereum people do not understand bitmaps. Bitmaps have not made anything that can allow someone to just step in and get it. Like that's the biggest roadblock, in my opinion, of these kind of like deep ordinal projects. For real adoption of some kind of thing, there needs to be a middle ground between the experience of I'm doing something new on Bitcoin but also I literally understand it by clicking the exact same button I would normally click on Ethereum. So
Yeah.
Runes doesn't have that, Bitmap doesn't have that, BRC20 doesn't have that. That is what we are attempting to make with CBRC20, specifically Motoswap.
Yeah, and it's no hate, by the way, on bitmaps or anything like that.
No.
All of the stuff that they've done, all the experimentation they've done, all the stuff you guys have contributed to that community as well is like super respected from our end, because again, anyone who's trying to do new things and try and play new games within the limitations of Bitcoin L1 deserves, I think, everyone's respect. It's especially with Runes specifically, there is a matter of like, people think that Casey knows what degens want, but he doesn't. He's a Bitcoin guy. He's a total nerd. Like, he doesn't really get, he's not an ETH trader. He's never really utilized or had a ton of ETH experience or DeFi experience. So he's not building the standard to facilitate the ETH experience on Bitcoin. He's in there. It will pump for sure. We're going to get in on all of the degen meta and play all those games. So I do think that it's being, a lot of people don't understand what runes are. So they're marketing it like it's going to be this catch-all solution to all of the limitations of BRC20. But I think very quickly and early on, people are going to realize that it's an improvement on the back end for BRC20, but it doesn't inherently give you any extra major functionality that solves some of the key problems with fungible assets on Bitcoin right now.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah,
I kind of saw that coming. Like, ever since he first started like discussing it, I didn't see any mention of any kind of like introducing anything more robust or functional. Agreed. Like, those were the keywords missing from his like pitch, like his motivations behind this to begin with, right? And to piggyback on that is like, he also like hates fungible tokens anyway. So I wouldn't expect somebody with that kind of sentiment to introduce anything of like true innovation. Yeah. Right. So I think you're right. Like, it's going to be the Casey show for who knows how long, maybe like a month, 2, 3 max. People are going to label it as like, hey, 2024, it was Rune summer. It was Casey summer. And then at some point, that's going to come cratering right back down to reality. It's like, damn, this shit actually sucks. And then, the actual innovators are going to step up and like, demonstrate like, functionality, robustness matters. You can't do anything of substance without it. Right.
Yeah.
That's my prediction.
Yeah. We'll see best as best play out. I think, again, if there's still the majority of the limitations that you have with BRC20 with runes, even if on the back end it makes a little bit more sense, the front end user experience, like it has to feel just like ETH. You have to press swap on an AMM decentralized exchange, and you got to be able to make a token, LP it, open trading, bing bang boom, just like that. And until that exists on Bitcoin L1, we're not going to onboard anyone except who's already within the space. So it's just going to be like liquidity shifting and moving around, like how it has basically since Binance supported Ordi and Sats pretty much. We haven't really seen much.
If someone has $100 to play with into crypto, and it's the bull market, and everybody knows someone who's made 6-7 figures, whatever, if that is where we're heading towards, right? And there are new players with $100 to play, where will they enter into the casino? Solana, Ethereum, Polygon, or new option of Bitcoin? I mean, on Solana, that's probably where they would go right now because it's not super option on Bitcoin. Ethereum is too expensive for you to make. If you only have $100, you can make one swap on Bitcoin. You'll never sell. I hope you have diamond hands. Congratulations. On ETH. On Ethereum. On Polygon, again, it's very cheap, but there's no liquidity on Polygon. And Bitcoin is not only the one that everybody knows, so you don't have to teach them how to use a new thing or understand anything new. It has the most amount of liquidity, and it will be just as cheap basically as Solana, if not cheaper to swap, because you're only submitting data. You're not actually executing anything on chain. So I do think, like there is a key to, yes, we've had almost a year and a half of ordinals, and there are kind of like sub metas and like maybe what I would call echo chambers that have existed that are like deep lore based, where you have to like get it to really get it.
Yeah.
But those are the things that are like kind of going to be missed out on. I mean, I was an early NFT guy on Ethereum. There was a lot of fine art that I bought and a lot of profile pictures that looked like garbage that I didn't mint. And guess what ended up being liquid during the bull market? It's like nobody was buying one of one pieces of fine art. They were buying profile pictures. So it's like you get these deep lore based pockets in ordinals, and I think there's a lot of eyes on ordinals that are looking to not have to spend even longer than 10 minutes or 5 minutes to understand why is this different from ETH and how do I use it. And with the wallets that are getting better and the charting websites are getting better and the games are getting better, I think the best is best kind of mindset of whoever does that experience best is going to have a lot of use in the upcoming cycle. And they bring a swap onto Bitcoin. That's can't get much simpler than that.
All right, guys. Well, this was a really fun conversation. I really like talking to you guys because, like understanding like this technological aspect of what we're doing here is really important to really figure out like where we're going to spend most of our time, where the market is going to spend most of their time, because I think that's where the most entertaining activity is going to occur. So it's really awesome talking to you guys. I really appreciate all you're doing. We definitely would like you to come back on, sometime soon, just to give some updates on everything that's going on in Motoswap. I guess any last words from you guys on like any upcoming things that you guys got working on or anything coming out soon, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, first want to say thanks for having us on. Again, you guys there's a very limited people in the space, I think, who have a really full scope and are not like bag bias types. Like you guys are just constantly trying to do cool stuff. Again, DMT, NAT, that type of stuff is awesome. The amount of support that you guys have provided, pretty much any project that's doing anything new, you guys have been a platform to give those projects exposure. So we really appreciate you guys having us on. And Danny, I don't know if you want to give any leaks or anything like that. Motoswap is live on testnet right now.
Yeah, we're live on the testnet. If you enjoyed hearing about Metaprotocols and stuff like that, we did a 2-hour-long summit panel at ETH Denver just about 2 weeks ago now, and that's linked on our Twitter, and it's also on YouTube now. So definitely check that out. Yeah, we're in testnet, and we should be open. Oh, we're getting more fireworks again. Let's go!
Freaking Zoom, man. All right, guys,
to celebrate. We're on the testnet.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to be live as soon as possible, but who knows when that could be. So.
Well, definitely. Right. Once you go live, let us know, and we'll have you come back on and just see like all the mania that's occurring. Because I know like anytime like a new technology comes out, it's like it's a focus for everybody, right? So I really appreciate you guys. All the links that you talked about is going to be in the description. Everything's going to be there. Thank you guys for showing up, and thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys, and until the next podcast.
Thanks for having us. Peace out.